I once heard the advice that you should talk to a divorce lawyer before you get into a marriage. And the only other thing like marriage is business. Today, we talk with Morgan Tate. He's a mergers and acquisitions advisor with Breakwater MA. He walks us through the difference between valuation and saleability and how a high value business doesn't necessarily command a higher sale price. He walks us through how to get out of the founder trap where most of your deals are coming from your own personal network and your personal brand, and how to make your business more attractive to a buyer. Even if you're not looking to sell it, it makes the business much smoother and easier to run by withdrawing yourself from the day-to-day operations. So if you're a 7+ figure agency owner, even if you're not looking to sell in the next few years, this is a high value session that will help you understand how to run your business from the perspective of someone who buys and sells businesses for their career. Enjoy.
Yeah, well, thanks for having me on, Austin. Yeah, I'll be talking today basically two different main topics. One is the main one being maximizing your agency's value and also differentiating what makes a agency actually saleable versus valuable and talking about that difference, because a lot of people get that wrong. But I can maybe start just with a quick commentary on like the macro condition before I dive right in, because the question already came up. But yeah, well, I recently worked on an agency deal, had a ton of inbound inquiry. I think we got 116 NDAs submitted on that particular deal. And this is a small agency. And I think that part of the reason why is there's kind of two different groups. I think there's some agency owners that are looking at consolidating just because maybe they've hit their maximum of organic growth, and growing inorganically via acquisition is a nice way to go. And as you get to a certain scale, every agency you buy, you'll buy them at a set valuation, and I'll talk about valuation a bit more later on. But let's just say you pay for every dollar profit, you pay like $3. It's like a 3 times multiple. If you're at a bigger agency, you can sell for 5 times. So if every incremental profit dollar you're bringing, you're automatically increasing your valuation of your agency, which is why people are consolidating a bit more. I think also agency owners are able to do more now with AI. And I think people are seeing that opportunity that, who knows in 10 years what it's going to look like. But in the next 5, probably that intermediary between the client and the end product of work is still going to exist. And maybe the agency structure is just going to look different. And now you can have a 2 or 3 person shop doing 2, 3, 4 million of revenue versus whereas before maybe you were capped out before adding more overhead. So I think that's also quite compelling. So I think those two things are where it is. And then I had multiple buyers that are actually looking at buying an agency for the purpose of servicing their holdco. So they're like, I spend so much on agencies, I should just own one and run it in-house. Whether or not that's a good idea, that's a common thing as well, as, hey, I'm going to build an agency, then I'm going to use it to market the businesses that other businesses that I own. So kind of some of those tailwinds that are coming in right now. So diving into it, today's goal is kind of sharing the playbook to allow you to create $1 million agency. And then for some of you, hopefully it's a multi-million-dollar agency. So, how do you take your business from where it's at and maximize it? A little backdrop on me. So my name is Morgan Tate. I've closed about 50 deals in the M&A space over the last 4 years. And I built a software product in the space called Deal Builder. And I'm the founder of Breakwater M&A, which is an M&A firm here in Canada, but works across North America. The sentiment that I want to say is that this is a common phrase you'll hear all the time, and the best businesses are bought, not sold. And so my answer to that, and whether or not that's exactly true, I kind of share more thoughts on that. But you should set yourself up to be easy, make it easy for someone to buy you, regardless. Even if you're not in the position to sell right now, even if you're thinking about selling in 5 years down the road, maybe 2 years down the road, it does not hurt you to get your business in a position where you could sell. And I think the biggest mistake most owners make is waiting until they're burnt out, ready to retire. Then they do their exit planning and they're trying to get it done all in a truncated period of time rather than just, hey, if you build your business ready to sell, it'll be more valuable, it'll be more profitable. We say all the time, if you are working on exit planning, you're going to be more predictably profitable, and hopefully you'll be working less too. So that's what I'm going to share and talk about today as well. The big thing that the big concept and the walkaway for most of you today is that I would want to talk about is the difference between salability and valuation, because they are not the same thing. So the difference is you can have a very highly valuable business that would be impossible to sell. And you can have a very low value business that's very easy to sell. And the analogy I use all the time is take like a YouTube channel. So you have a YouTube influencer, they're making $2 million a year from their business. That's a very valuable business, but it's impossible to sell because as a buyer, I can't come in, replace that YouTube personality and start to make the same cash flow. The audience is going to go away. There's no way to really sell that business. And a lot of agencies, a lot of small businesses are actually struggle with the same problem. So I'm going to talk about the three most common ways or impediments to selling that affect most business owners, regardless of whether you're an agency or otherwise, but I will go into more specifics with agencies as well today. So I call these like the entrepreneurship traps and around salability and factors. So instead of pushing a rock aimlessly up the hill, if you're able to unlock these three things, it's going to make your life a lot easier. And so to make them more memorable, I made them more dramatic. So the first one being the owner dependency pit of despair. We have the client concentration curse, and then the invisible processes vortex. So those are the three main ones that I'm going to talk about. If you were to work on these over the next 12 months, you're going to put yourself in a far greater position. Even if you weren't going to increase your revenue or profit, it's going to help with positioning yourself to be able to sell to a potential buyer. So I'm also going to quote Michael Gerber from the E-Myth, very popular book, kind of talks about the difference, really talks about entrepreneurship and small business. And this quote really sums it up. If your business depends on you, you don't own a business, you have a job, and it's the worst job in the world because you are working for a lunatic. And so I think it's a really great one.
So true.
And yes,
So
yeah,
true.
Kevin, yeah, that ring true a little bit. Yeah. Yeah, we're getting some nods. Yeah, so I've been in this position as well, and you have the world's worst boss, and it's yourself sometimes. So how do we fire ourselves is kind of the question. And yeah, it's again that idea of, you'll hear this from buyers all the time too, which I think is sometimes an unfair criticism, but why would I buy this business as just buying a job? Which is sometimes true in a way. Like if you look at what the owner's actually pulling out compared to their hours, it's a pretty poor paying job sometimes. So how do we build into an investable business that someone can actually own and grow the asset? And it doesn't take much, which is the exciting part.
I hear this from founders all the time. They're in a lifelong journey, which is growing their business, and they want solutions fast, but more so they want a tribe that they're going to be able to connect to while they're growing the business. That's why we created the Agency Owner Network. It's a vetted peer community for 7+ figure agency owners where they're figuring out solutions, getting strategies and tactics, and building their business with a tribe. And in the first 90 days, 60% of members report forming a partnership or a joint venture with another member, and they make smarter, faster decisions all through operational processes, frameworks, and expert connections. As the founder, my job is to listen intently and connect each member with the right people, frameworks, and resources for their stage of business. I'm here to make sure you're never stuck without a solution. So if you're a growth stage founder and you want to scale with a tribe, go to agencyowner.network/join and submit your application. And I look forward to talking to you on the inside.
If we're going to start with owner dependency, I find that this is usually the hardest one out of the three for owners to escape, but it's the biggest unlock for buyer interest. So just before we started the call, I was talking about, I'm working on an agency deal where it's $500,000 in revenue. So very small, only has 2 employees and a couple contractors, makes about 100 or so, 150 in profit. And we had a lot of interest in that one. And we're actually probably going to close it this month. And the reason why is because those two employees run the whole business, and the owner has managed to build that level of management so the business is running under the guidance of those two managers. So we can really sell the business to anyone, because now the person coming in doesn't have to be a full-time owner operator of the business. So that was a really big unlock, and that's probably like a deal that would be on the smallest end that I would do. But I knew because it had that factor, we'd be able to make the deal happen. And then I've worked on obviously larger deals as well, where honestly the business is a lot bigger, it's making a lot more profit, but it's harder to sell because the owner has all the key sales relationships, is running the day-to-day, working 80-hour weeks, and they could be making 2 million in profit, and we can't sell it because there's so much risk to the buyer. So this really helps you de-risk the buyer. And I'm going to talk about specific ways that you can reduce this issue as well. So the challenge I have for the people on the call, and a challenge for you is handing over your largest client to an account manager, and provide a single handoff SOP. So a single page document. Give them no other meetings, this is a big risk, handing off maybe your largest or second largest, handing off that client relationship to someone else, only using documentation and seeing how the outcome goes. And if that makes you worried or fearful, or your gut reaction saying, no way in hell am I going to do that, then okay, you have a bit of an owner dependency problem, because how are you going to continue to scale the business if you have to be involved in every minute detail of a new client or working that way? So that is one challenge to take away for owner dependency. The next one is our revenue curve, so client concentration. So as a general rule of thumb, you typically don't want a single client to exceed more than 15%, 1-5 of revenue, and your top 5 clients to not exceed 50% of revenue. And the reason why is, if you have a client leave, obviously it's going to make a huge impact on the buyer's underwriting of the deal moving forward. And so the challenge or takeaway on this one is, in the next 30 days, run a 12-month revenue report, trailing 12 months. So the last 12 months, you can pull this out of QuickBooks or whatever accounting bookkeeping system you use. And do that by client. Flag anyone that's over 15% of your revenue. And then work on an outbound sales, or however you've been generating your leads to get prospects in your pipeline. Get 2 or more that are going to bring your average concentration down under 15%. So trying to secure a bigger client to diversify. And this is a good thing to constantly be doing. It's like if you have an investment portfolio and you have, want a certain amount in equities, a certain amount in bonds, you want to rebalance it so it doesn't get out of whack when the market grows. Same with your business. As it grows, you should be factoring that in. If you land a super big client, it's going to be a game changer. That's great. But you should immediately start going, okay, how do I mitigate this? I've heard a lot of stories from people that, hey, we just signed a massive new client. We're going to have to hire like 2 new people to support the account. Oh, that person cancels 6 months later, and now you're scrambling because you haven't backfilled in the work if that client were to walk away. So and then the third challenge is going to be the inefficiency of invisibility. So the hidden processes vortex. So this is having scattered documentation all over the place. You got some stuff that's in Google Docs, some stuff that's in Slack. You've emailed certain people things. And then every time you get a new client, you think it's a good job to have got some hands raised, reinventing processes for every new client that you bring on. So this is a good time to rethink our onboarding, but it never actually gets updated into a single source of truth. So there's really no excuse for SOPs anymore now that tools like Loom exist, where you can just film a video and an AI writes you like a perfect SOP based off of the recording. And it's, like a $10 a month tool, which is my go-to now. Is I'll just, even if I'm screen recording nothing that I want shared, I just use it to write the SOP for me and talk through it, or using any other AI tool to do that. And then having them in a Google Doc or if you're Microsoft Suite in OneDrive, that breaks everything down. And obviously start with the revenue generating and client support service related ones, and then all the way down to how does someone access their password? If you have a new employee, like what's the checklist for a new employee coming on board? All the way down to that level. Really does help with buyers. And if you can show that, they're like, oh, this is a well-run, this is a great business. And we got a comment as well that ScribeHow is a good SOP builder. It's a good tip as well.
Sorry, quick question on that,
Yeah.
Morgan. The value increase there is that so that is definitely a icing on the cake in a sense of increase. Like if you really want to maximize your multiple, is the more systems, the more independent your team is, all these things increase the multiple. It's not just going to get you ready for sale.
Yeah,
Both.
exactly. Well, so let's just say if the average agency is going to be between like a 3 to 5 times EBITDA, you can have, as you build scale, also scale matters. If you're smaller, you're going to get smaller multiples, kind of generally how it works. And as you get larger, you're going to get a stronger multiple as well. But it's defensibility. So one is just you're going to widen your buyer pool. And as you widen your buyer pool, you're going to get more interest. And as you get more interest, you're going to have more competing offers, which ultimately will drive the deal terms up. So I see it more that way, is that it's a way to build a bidding process for your business. Because it's like, oh, this is really dialed in. This will be easy to take on. It's not going to take a lot of work. And there's a lot more money out there than there are operators. So you have a lot of people that want to invest in deals, but they don't want to be a full-time operator. So if you can widen your attraction to all the investor class, then now you've got a really interesting business.
Makes sense. Thank you for that.
Yeah, no problem. So the challenge on this one, in the next 7 days, pick your single highest impact service. So whether that's like an SEO audit, whatever work is for your business, and write out a 1-page SOP in the following format. So you have the objective, the step-by-step actions, the owner of that process and the tools that will be used, and then the deliverable, like what should that final outcome. And then ideally that's not in here is a good example of the completed product. So there's actually a visual. So let's just say it's, an example audit that's really great from a previous client. Like here's our best one, and you link to it in a folder in Google Drive so that the person can say, oh, this is a good visual example. Save that in your shared document storage of your choice, and run that next project related to that service. So the next SEO audit you have, just using that SOP. So stress test it by not having any verbal communication. See if it's good enough, and it's not, then you have to fill in the gaps and it'll really strengthen it. So we're going to talk about a particular deal here and get into the deal details as well. So this is a case study on a recent transaction I worked on. So it was an SEO agency in Canada. The average contract value was about $2,500 a month. Its MRR was around $81K a month. Lifetime value was $41K per client. It was in a niche kind of industry. The financials, these are kind of slightly adjusted just for confidentiality. Oops. Top line revenue was about $1 million. Their EBITDA, so not to do a deep dive on what EBITDA is, but basically EBITDA is going to take your profit plus discretionary expenses that an owner might be running through the business for tax purposes or one-off expenses. And then we add back interest on long-term debt, amortization, depreciation, taxes. There's not a lot of depreciation and amortization in most digital agencies, so it's usually pretty close to your net income number. And then the one key thing that most people get wrong is your EBITDA should have a normalized salary for yourself. So if you only take dividends out of the business, you're very underpaid. So we have to normalize, hey, if you were to get replaced with a general manager or a CEO, would you be paying them $100,000 a year? Would it be $150K a year? We add that as an expense back in to get to your realistic bottom line. So if your agency is running at like 50% net income margins, it's probably wrong. Like it probably should be lower if we normalized it. And so that's in this particular business, the owner's son was the general manager, getting paid a market salary, a salary he was willing to stay on post purchase. So his EBITDA was quite easy to calculate. Where we were at we were kind of asking around the 4 times multiple. We ended up with a 3.8 multiple. So to the earlier questions of where things land between 3 to 5 times. This one was not going to get 5 times for a couple of reasons that I'll share in a minute. But we got 116 NDAs submitted. We had 3 different offers on this particular deal. The ultimate deal structure that closed, we actually got an offer at 1.5. And because of the owner's preference for more cash at closing, the buyer said, okay, I'll give you more cash, but I'm going to reduce the price by about 100,000. And there was 800,000 cash at closing. There was a deferred payment of 500,000. And the only reason why for this was because the buyer had some money in an investment trust that needed to be pulled out over time. Otherwise, it would have been, most of it at closing. And then there was a 100K holdback. So holdback is typically an amount that is kept in the deal for expenses that might come up. So undisclosed liabilities or expenses. It's basically just a way to make sure the buyer doesn't get screwed over, for lack of a better term, after the deal closes.
It's self-insurance basically for the buyer.
Yeah. Most of the time you're not going to get full cash at closing. So that was the kind of how the deal shook out. It was a very clean deal. And that typically there's going to be more vendor financing in this. The owner was pretty hard about not doing a lot of seller financing. And so what you'd usually see is somewhere between 10 to 20%, particularly in the United States with the SBA program, which is kind of how they put the loans together, where you're going to be holding 10 or 20% of the purchase price as basically a loan as the other bank to the purchaser. Now the SBA just changed the ruling around where if there is seller financing involved, it has to stay as on standby if the buyer's only putting 5% into the deal for the length of the loan, which is like 10 years, which made it a lot less attractive. But if they're putting a 10% down payment in, then you can get paid back faster. But that's just generally, you will see some seller financing. Typical term is anywhere between 12 months to 36 months, sometimes 5 years. And that's a negotiation.
Was this an all Canada deal? Like the investor was Canadian and the seller was Canadian?
Yeah, the buyer was actually a corporate professional, which we're seeing a lot of. So people that are working for a big company and want to go into to buy a business, become, for the freedom of business ownership and entrepreneurship, we all know the pros and cons of that dream. But yeah, a lot of people are moving into that space. And he was a lawyer, corporate lawyer. So wanted to get into this space. The seller themselves was a self-taught SEO guy. The seller was in his late 50s, actually maybe he was in his 60s, and was just sick of running real world businesses. I don't want any more inventory. I don't want accounts receivable. I just want to, work from wherever. Worked on his boat most of the time and had built a great life, but he was ready to retire. So that was kind of how that deal came together. In terms of rules of thumb, this is another kind of just tangible takeaways. I tried to put a lot of tangibility into this, and we'll send the deck out too so people can have these as well. But that EBITDA margin, 15 to 25%, sometimes it could be higher. If you start to get really high, like 40%, 50%, buyers are actually going to say, okay, there might be, it's not quite representative of what it's actually going to look like if I had an operator in place. Like maybe the salaries, maybe you're underpaying people and that can only last for so long, things like that. Same with gross profit margins. So gross profit after you pay subcontractors, or if you're doing like paid ads, things like that, around the 50 to 70% marker. It depends on your type of agency. This sometimes can be a lot higher if you're more service focused than if you're doing maybe like, paid ads and things like that nature. This one. So concentration, 15%, 20%, not greater than a single client being larger than that. Ideally, you have more recurring revenue than project revenue. So project revenue being like if you're doing a website project and there's like no ongoing monthly or SEO audits, like those are great. They can be high margin, but they're not as repeatable. So buyers like to have that monthly recurring revenue. Delivery. So if you're responsible for less than 20% of the delivery of service, then that's obviously a great bonus. And ideally, you're mostly providing oversight in a perfect world. I know that's not always likely, but if you can strive to get there, then that is great. And then those SOPs, just having it documented for all the core services and things is also really important as well. So one of the things that, and I can go into the Q&A about the difficulties we had with the deal and how it almost died a million times. One of the things was that the client actually had no clients under contract technically. And the buyer of the business, it was all just not even like month-to-month contracts, like just Stripe link for like, here's the Stripe payment and we're off to the races. And the guy buying it was a lawyer. So I'm like, oh, this is going to kill the deal. Lawyer didn't have a problem with that at all. Surprisingly, he's like, whatever, contracts are about as good as you can. So I would not advise that. Make sure you have contracts. If you can get annual contracts is better, obviously. So that was one potential issue. The seller had some tax issues as well with the Canadian. Basically in Canada, you can get up to $1.5 million tax-free on a sale of a business if you sell the shares, but you have to do a couple of things to qualify. And he waited until we were under offer, even though I had asked him before we started to talk to his tax planner in the midst of the deal. And this is like a 2-year process, the way he wanted to do this thing. And so that nearly killed it. And we found a workaround. He ended up firing his daughter, who was an employee of the business, because him and his son thought she wasn't the value wasn't there. So it was kind of crazy. There was a lot of things that we had to work through. Deals are messy, deals are complicated. And so the more prep work you can do in advance will save a lot of pain later. And so this is another quote, Benjamin Franklin quote, by failing to prepare, you're preparing to fail. So that's part of what I'm talking about here is most of the problem with most owners when they go to sell their business, they've done zero prep, or they think the prep starts when they're ready to sell. And ideally you should be ready at any given time. And I'm just going to rehash that and hammer that over the head a bunch of times. So what I did is I wrote, it's about 20 something pages. I'm going to put it in the chat, and then also I'll give it to you, Austin, too, to send for people that are watching the recording. It's an exit guide. It's PDF, more comprehensive than what I just shared. It's in general, so it's not specific to agencies, but it's useful for any business owner as well. And then I have an agency owner checklist as well. So I'll send that to Austin. And it just has a specific kind of one-pager checklist items that you can go through and answer. And it should be helpful to start that prep process. And then, that was kind of the main that I had today. I'm happy to talk more on Q&A and also about the deal if there's more questions as well.
Morgan, that's awesome. Thank you so much for bringing this up. The thing that's really landing to me, especially for this group, is the paying yourself as an owner to attract buyers, even if you're not looking to sell. Like that's still something to consider if you're just paying yourself dividends instead of a salary. I'll kick off the Q&A. Is it possible to have both, or what do you recommend to owners in that position? Do you recommend taking a salary or just claiming distributions?